The day the aliens arrived changed everything. Captain Jin stood at the observation deck, watching the massive ship hover above Seoul's skyline. Its sleek design resembled nothing made by human hands, all flowing curves in a metal that shifted colors like oil on water. "They're requesting to speak with you specifically," said General Park, looking uncomfortable in his dress uniform. "Their scans pick you out from the entire population. Just you." Jin nodded silently. After 15 years in diplomatic service, he thought he'd seen everything. First contact with an alien civilization wasn't on his resume. The meeting location was set for the National Science Center, cleared of all visitors. Jin arrived early, heart pounding as security teams made final preparations. The aliens had agreed to send only 2 representatives to minimize panic. At precisely noon, a beam of light appeared in the center of the main hall. 2 figures materialized, one tall and clearly in a position of authority, the other smaller but moving with precise efficiency. "I am Ambassador Tomi of the Moranian Empire," the taller one said in perfect Korean. Its voice was melodic despite coming from a mouth that didn't quite match the sounds. "This is Royal Scientist Nami." Jin bowed slightly. "Captain Jin of the United Earth Council. Welcome to Earth." The aliens resembled humans in broad strokes. 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head, but the similarities ended there. Their skin held a bluish tint that seemed to pulse with internal light. Eyes too large and entirely black observed him with unnerving steadiness. "We have been observing your world for some time," Tomi said. "We come with urgency and hope." Jin gestured to the conference table prepared for this moment. "Please, share what brings you across the stars to find us." The smaller alien, Nami, placed a crystal device on the table. It projected a 3-dimensional image of DNA strands twisted in configurations Jin had never seen. "Our species faces extinction," Nani explained. Her voice was higher, almost musical. "The royal bloodline carries a flaw that grows worse with each generation. Our genetic diversity was compromised during the Great Migration 15,000 years ago." "I'm sorry to hear that," Jin said carefully, "but I'm not sure how Earth can help with an alien genetic problem." Tomi's eyes blinked sideways. "We discovered something remarkable about humans. Your DNA contains adaptive qualities unlike anything we've seen in our galaxy surveys. Your species evolved on a planet with extreme variation. Seasons, climates, predators. This forced adaptability into your very cells." Jin listened as they explained how humans possessed unique genetic repair mechanisms that Moranians lacked. Their scientists believed human DNA could stabilize their royal genome. "We've been watching your broadcasts, learning your languages," Tomi continued. "We know you are divided politically but united in curiosity. We hope this shared quality will help us find a solution." "So you need human genetic material?" Jin asked, trying to understand the implications. "Not just any human," Nani said, activating another display. Jin was startled to see his own DNA rotating in the projection. "Your specific genetic structure shows optimal compatibility with our royal line." The meeting continued for hours as more human scientists and officials joined. The aliens explained their situation in greater detail. The Moranian Empire spanned 27 star systems, but faced collapse without their queen's guidance. Queen Lyra was the last viable member of the royal line. Without intervention, she would be the final Moranian ruler. 3 days later, Jin found himself aboard the alien vessel, invited to speak directly with their queen. Human governments remained divided on how to respond, but scientific curiosity had won the first round of debates. The royal chamber took Jin's breath away. The ceiling opened directly to space, protected by some invisible barrier that kept atmosphere in while allowing the stars to shine through. Queen Lyra sat upon a crystalline throne that seemed to grow from the floor itself. She was both beautiful and alien, taller than the others, with a luminescence to her skin that made her appear to glow from within. A crown of living metal shifted and moved around her head like liquid. "Captain Jin," she said, her voice resonating through the chamber. I apologize for the deception. Deception. Jin tensed. We told your people we need genetic material to save our species. This is true, but incomplete. The queen rose from her throne, moving with fluid grace. Our scientists believe a direct joining is required. In human terms, mating. Jin felt his face flush. That's not what your representatives explained to Earth's Council. They shared what they thought your leaders could accept as a first step. Queen Lyra moved closer. Our species are compatible in ways that defy scientific explanation. We believe this represents a cosmic design. With respect, Your Majesty, I'm a diplomat, not a genetic donor, Jin said carefully. The Queen's expression showed something like amusement. We are not asking for immediate decision. We understand the cultural implications, but time runs short for my people. She gestured, and a wall dissolved to reveal a medical chamber. Inside floated several Moranian children, their skin pale and translucent, attached to life support systems. The royal cousins, Lyra explained, sadness evident in her voice. Each generation grows weaker. They will not survive to adulthood. I am the last with sufficient genetic stability to rule, and even my system shows signs of degradation. Jin moved closer to the chamber, watching the small figures floating peacefully. How many have you lost? 17 royal births in the past decade. None survived past their 5th year. Lyra touched the barrier separating them from the children. My own siblings numbered 12 at birth. I alone remain. The gravity of their situation hit Jin fully. This wasn't simply a diplomatic mission or scientific exchange. An entire civilization looked to him as their possible salvation. Your people's council will debate, as they should, Lyra said. Meanwhile, learn about us. Judge whether we are worthy of salvation. In the days that followed, Jin toured the massive ship and spoke with many Moranians. They shared their history, arts, and philosophy openly. They had achieved interstellar travel 5,000 years ago and built a peaceful coalition of worlds under their guidance. During a private dinner with the Queen, Jin finally asked the question that had bothered him since their first meeting. Why me specifically? There are billions of humans on Earth. Lyra's expression grew serious. Our scans identified 47 humans with potential genetic compatibility. Further analysis narrowed to 5 optimal candidates. You were selected not only for genetics but for your diplomatic position and psychological profile. You studied my psychology? Jin asked, surprised. We needed someone who could understand the burden of leadership, someone with compassion but also practical wisdom. Lyra's eyes held his, someone who might come to care for a people, not his own. Jin considered this. And if I refuse? Then we continue searching for alternatives while our time grows shorter. Lyra's voice remained calm, but Jin sensed her fear. We do not believe in coercion, Captain Jin. Any union must be freely chosen. That night, unable to sleep, Jin watched Earth rotating slowly beneath the ship. The blue planet looked small and vulnerable from space, yet it held the key to saving an advanced civilization. Tomorrow, he would return to Earth with the Moranian proposal. The debates would be fierce, the implications enormous. Whatever humanity decided, nothing would ever be the same again. Jin wondered what his answer would be when the time came. Looking at the stars that the Moranians called home, he realized how much larger the universe had suddenly become. Jin returned to Earth carrying knowledge that would change human history forever. The United Council gathered in emergency session. Representatives from every nation crowded into the Grand Hall in Geneva. Security was tight. News of the alien visitors had leaked despite efforts to keep first contact quiet. They need our help, Jin explained, standing before the world's leaders. Their species faces extinction within 3 generations. Projected behind him were images of the Moranian ship and its inhabitants. Some council members leaned forward with fascination. Others recoiled slightly at the aliens' appearance. Their royal bloodline suffers from progressive genetic damage, Jin continued. Each generation becomes weaker. Queen Lyra is the last viable ruler, and even she shows early signs of the condition. President Lee of the Pacific Alliance raised her hand, and they believe human DNA can save them. Why us specifically? Jin activated a display showing comparative DNA strands. Human genetic material contains unique adaptive qualities. Our species evolved through countless natural disasters and climate shifts. This forced exceptional repair mechanisms into our DNA. Dr. Min, Earth's leading geneticist, took the podium next. She had spent days analyzing the data provided by the Moranians. The alien data appears accurate, she confirmed. Their genetic degradation is real and accelerating. Their science is far advanced beyond ours in many areas, but they lack our genetic diversity. Humans have more variation between individuals than their entire species possesses. The room erupted with questions. Jin held up his hands for quiet. There's more, he said. Queen Lyra has authorized me to share their complete proposal. The council chamber fell silent as Jin explained what the queen had told him privately, that the Moranians believed a direct genetic union was necessary, not just sample donations. They're asking for a human mate for their queen. General Yu asked, his expression hard to read. They're asking for me specifically, Jin clarified. Their scans identified my genetic structure as optimally compatible with their royal line. The silence that followed felt heavy. President Lee looked troubled. Captain Jin, are you willing to consider this? Jin took a deep breath. I believe we must explore all diplomatic options. They offer to share technology centuries beyond our own in exchange for helping save their species. The debate raged for days. Some nations saw opportunity in alliance with an advanced civilization. Others feared deception or viewed the proposal as biologically inappropriate. Religious leaders voiced concerns about cross-species breeding. Scientists countered with arguments about shared genetic foundations, despite superficial differences. Meanwhile, Jin underwent extensive medical testing. Dr. Min's team worked around the clock analyzing his DNA alongside the Moranian samples. It's remarkable, Dr. Min told him one evening as they reviewed results. The compatibility is higher than should be possible for species that evolved on different planets. Almost as if. As if what? Jin asked. As if there were some ancient connection between our worlds. She shook her head. But that's speculation beyond the data. 1 week after his return, Jin met with Queen Lyra again. This time, she came to Earth, landing her personal shuttle at a remote military base. The meeting was arranged with minimal personnel. Just Jin, Dr. Min, and 2 security officers. The Queen stepped from her craft without protective gear, confirming Moranian compatibility with Earth's atmosphere. She wore a simple garment that seemed to flow like liquid around her tall frame. The crown of living metal still adorned her head, shifting slightly as she moved. Your world is beautiful, Lyra said, looking at the mountain range surrounding them. We have nothing so untamed on our homeworlds. Jin bowed slightly. Thank you for coming personally, Your Majesty. It shows good faith to our leaders. Faith is important when building trust between strangers. Her black eyes studied him. Has your council reached any conclusions? They're divided, Jin admitted, but they've authorized further scientific exchange while discussions continue. Dr. Min stepped forward with controlled excitement. Your Majesty, we've confirmed the genetic compatibility your scientists identified. However, we believe there may be alternatives to traditional methods. Lyra tilted her head. You propose artificial combination. Possibly. With your permission, we'd like to test some theories using the samples your team provided. The Queen considered this. Time grows short for my people, but we will explore all paths. You may proceed with your research. Later that day, Jin showed Queen Lyra the countryside, driving along coastal roads where security could ensure privacy. The Queen asked endless questions about Earth's ecosystems, history, and cultures. Your species fascinates me, she said as they watched waves crash against cliffs. So young compared to ours, yet you've accomplished much despite your divisions. Perhaps because of our divisions, Jin suggested. Competition drives innovation. An interesting perspective. My people unified thousands of years ago. Perhaps we lost something in gaining peace. As sunset painted the sky orange and red, Lyra grew somber. I must show you something, Captain Jin. From a small container, she produced what looked like a crystal shard. When she touched it, images appeared in the air between them. Moranian children, dozens of them, all sickly and connected to medical equipment. These are the royal nurseries, she explained. My cousins, nephews, nieces, none will survive to adulthood. Their genetic structure is already failing. Jin watched the images with growing sadness. And this was me as a child. Lyra continued. The image shifted to show a healthier child, though still attached to monitoring equipment. I was the strongest of my generation, yet I required constant medical intervention. My siblings were not so fortunate. The images faded. Lyra turned to face the ocean, her profile sharp against the setting sun. I rule 27 worlds, Captain Jin. Billions of my people look to me for guidance and continuity, yet I cannot provide the one thing they truly need, a future. Jin stood beside her in silence, feeling the weight of her burden. If I may ask, he said finally, why has your species not tried genetic modification before? Your technology seems advanced enough. We have, she replied. For centuries, each attempt ends the same way. Temporary stability followed by accelerated degradation. Our scientists believe we've reached the limits of what can be done with Moranian genetics alone. We need something truly different, the adaptability that makes humans unique. Back at the United Council the next day, Jin reported on his conversations with the Queen. The scientific teams shared preliminary results that confirmed the Moranians' claims. Their royal line carries a genetic flaw similar to diseases we've seen on Earth, Dr. Min explained, but far more complex. The compatible elements in human DNA could potentially provide a natural repair mechanism. President Li addressed Jin directly. Captain, you've spent the most time with these visitors. Do you trust their intentions? Jin considered carefully before answering. I believe their situation is genuine. I've seen evidence of their genetic deterioration firsthand, and I believe Queen Lyra is sincere in her desire for a mutually beneficial arrangement. But this arrangement may include you becoming, General Yu hesitated, searching for appropriate words, a genetic donor. At minimum, Jin finished for him. Possibly more. I understand the implications. The debate continued for another week while scientific teams worked frantically on alternatives. Jin met with Queen Lyra daily, learning more about Moranian culture and history. Despite their alien appearance, he found many similarities in their values and concerns. On the 10th day, Dr. Min requested an urgent meeting with both Jin and Queen Lyra. We've found something, she said, her eyes bright with excitement. The compatibility between Captain Jin and Moranian royal genetics isn't random. There's a pattern that suggests deliberate engineering sometime in the distant past. What are you suggesting? Jin asked. That perhaps humans and Moranians share a creator, Dr. Min said, or that one species influenced the development of the other. Queen Lyra's expression remained unreadable, but her crown shifted more rapidly, suggesting emotional response. This changes nothing about our current crisis, she said finally, but it raises fascinating questions about our shared history. As they left the laboratory, Lyra turned to Jin. Your people still debate while my people suffer. I must know, Captain Jin, if your council cannot reach consensus, what will you decide? Jin looked into her alien eyes and saw something he recognized despite their differences, hope mixed with fear. I believe helping you is the right thing to do, he said quietly, but I need to understand exactly what would be required of me. Lyra nodded. Then it is time I showed you our homeworld. Will you come? Jin stood on the observation deck of the Moranian royal vessel as it dropped out of faster-than-light travel. The view stole his breath away. The Moranian homeworld hung in space like a jewel swirling blues deeper than Earth's oceans, land masses tinted purple from the vegetation, and cities that gleamed like scattered diamonds, even from orbit. "We call it Mora," Queen Lyra said, standing beside him. "First world of our empire." Jin nodded, still taking in the sight. 3 small moons orbited the planet, and in the distance, a gas giant loomed large in the sky. This was farther from Earth than any human had ever traveled. The 3-week journey had given him time to learn basic Moranian language and customs, though much remained mysterious. "Your world is beautiful," he said simply. "Once, perhaps. Now it is mostly artificial." There was sadness in her voice. "We shaped our environment too aggressively in our early development. What you see is the result of 10,000 years of restoration." The landing craft descended through clouds that shimmered with iridescent particles. As they broke through, Jin saw vast crystal structures rising from the landscape, the famous Moranian cities he had seen in their historical records. A large crowd had gathered at the landing area. Jin felt a flutter of nervousness. He was the first human to set foot on an alien world, carrying the hopes of both species. "They are curious," Lyra explained. "No outsider has ever been considered for royal consort." As they stepped from the craft, Jin felt the slightly higher gravity pulling at his limbs. The air was thicker too, rich with unfamiliar scents. He had undergone treatments to help his body adjust, but theory and reality were different matters. A group of elaborately dressed Moranians approached and bowed deeply to their queen. The tallest among them, wearing armor that seemed to shift colors with each movement, spoke in their native tongue. Queen Lyra replied with authority, then switched to English. "Captain Jin, this is Rai, commander of the Royal Guard and keeper of tradition. He will oversee your preparation for the trials." Jin bowed as he had been taught. "I am honored to meet you, Commander." Rai's black eyes studied Jin without warmth. "The honor is questionable. Many believe this path is mistaken. Rai speaks freely by ancient right," Lyra explained, seeming unsurprised by his rudeness. "The commander serves tradition above even the monarch." "Tradition has preserved our species through 20 millennia, Rai said. Diluting our bloodline with alien genetics may save the body but kill the spirit." Jin met his gaze steadily. "I come in peace and with respect for your ways. I will abide by your traditions." "We shall see." Rai gestured to his subordinates. "The first trial begins at dawn. Rest while you can, human." Jin was shown to quarters in the royal palace, a structure that seemed to have been grown rather than built, with walls that curved organically and ceilings that soared to impossible heights. The room adjusted its environment to Earth-standard gravity and atmosphere, a courtesy that both welcomed and isolated him. That night, a young Moranian named Dal arrived to explain the trials. "There are 3 challenges you must face," Dal said, activating a holographic display. "They have remained unchanged since the founding of our empire." The first trial was physical, a test of endurance in Mora's natural environment without technological assistance. The second was mental, solving puzzles that had confounded generations of Moranian scholars. The third was spiritual, a ritual whose details were kept secret even from royal candidates until the moment of testing. "No outsider has ever attempted these trials," Dal said, his tone suggesting he thought Jin would fail. "Many Moranians train their entire lives, yet still fail." "Why does Commander Rai oppose my presence so strongly?" Jin asked. Dal hesitated before answering. "The commander leads the purist faction. They believe mixing our royal line with any outside influence will destroy what makes us Moranian." "And what do you believe?" "I believe we will die without change." Dal's voice dropped lower. "The royal nurseries grow emptier each cycle. Queen Lyra was the only survivor of her clutch. The next generation may not exist at all." At dawn, Jin was escorted to a natural area outside the city, one of the few remaining places where Mora's original ecosystem survived. The air here was not adjusted for him, and he felt its heaviness in his lungs. Commander Rai stood with several other officials beside a path that led into a purple forest. The trial of endurance requires you to cross the northern wilds and reach the Ancestor Stone by nightfall, Rai explained. The journey is 40 units, approximately 50 of your kilometers. You may carry water, but no food or technology. Jin nodded, stretching his muscles. Dr. Min had adjusted his body chemistry to better process Mora's atmosphere, but he would still be at a disadvantage. Many have died attempting this crossing, Rai added. If you wish to withdraw, now is the time. I will proceed, Jin said firmly. The forest was unlike anything on Earth. Plants moved with apparent consciousness, turning to track his progress. The gravity made each step harder than the last. Strange creatures scattered at his approach, some resembling insects the size of small dogs, others like transparent snakes that glided through the air. By midday, Jin's muscles burned with effort. The path climbed steadily upward through increasingly rough terrain. His enhanced biology was being pushed to its limits. He reached a river crossing to find Commander Rai waiting, having used some faster route. Most candidates rest here, Rai said, gesturing to the swift-flowing purple water. The current is strong, but not impossible. Jin studied the river carefully. Is there a preferred crossing point? That is for you to determine. Jin walked along the bank, observing the water's flow. Native candidates would know this river. Without that knowledge, he needed to find his own solution. Rather than crossing at the obvious narrow point, Jin continued upstream until he found a series of rock outcroppings. The crossing would be longer but broken into manageable jumps. As he made the first leap, he heard Rai make a sound. Surprise, perhaps, or reluctant approval. The afternoon brought new challenges. The temperature rose dramatically, and the air became even thicker. Jin's lungs strained with each breath. His water was half gone. He encountered a group of native creatures blocking the path, tubular bodies with multiple limbs that reminded him vaguely of centipedes. They watched him with intelligence in their clustered eyes. Jin stopped, remembering his briefings. These were sentient natives that had evolved alongside Moranians, not aggressive unless threatened. He bowed deeply and waited. After a moment, the largest creature returned the gesture and moved aside, clearing the path. When Jin finally reached the Ancestor Stone, a massive crystal formation atop a plateau, the suns were setting. Commander Rai waited with several officials who seemed surprised by his arrival. You have completed the first trial, Rai acknowledged. Verily. Jin was too exhausted to respond. His legs trembled with fatigue, and his lungs burned. That night, back at the palace, Queen Lyra visited his quarters. You impressed the council today, she said. No one expected you to finish the crossing. Jin sat up despite his exhaustion. Commander Rai seemed disappointed. Rai hoped you would fail quickly and prove his point about human weakness. Lyra's mouth curved in what Jin had learned was a Moranian smile. Instead, you demonstrated adaptability. You found a crossing no Moranian would consider because we are taught the traditional path from childhood. The mental trial comes tomorrow. Yes. Rest well, Captain Jin. Few challenges are purely physical or purely mental. Each test reveals different aspects of character. As she left, Jin wondered if he was being naive. Earth's council remained divided about this mission. Some believed the Moranians had ulterior motives beyond saving their species, yet what he had seen of their genetic crisis seemed genuine. He fell asleep wondering what puzzles tomorrow would bring, and whether human thinking might actually prove advantageous against problems that had stumped Moranians for generations. Jin entered the chamber of thought with sore muscles, but a determined mind. After yesterday's physical trial, he had expected time to recover. Moranian tradition, however, allowed no rest between challenges. The chamber was circular, its walls inscribed with symbols that shifted and changed as he watched. 7 elderly Moranians sat in a semicircle, their skin paler than others he had seen. At the center stood an object resembling a crystal cube, but with more dimensions than seemed possible. The puzzle of ancestors has remained unsolved for 12 generations, one elder explained. No candidate has fully resolved it, though some have made partial progress. Jin approached the cube cautiously. As he drew near, the crystal responded, glowing faintly. "You have until sunset," Commander Rai stated from the doorway. "Even attempting this puzzle carries risk. Some minds never fully recover from its complexities." Jin nodded and began his examination. The puzzle appeared to be a three-dimensional representation of a multi-dimensional problem. As he touched different facets, the internal structure rearranged itself. Hours passed as Jin worked through various approaches. The puzzle fought against conventional logic. Each solution he tried created new complications elsewhere in the structure. Frustration mounted as sunset approached. Then Jin remembered something Queen Lyra had mentioned during their journey to Mora. Moranian thinking was highly structured, bound by traditions that had served them well for millennia. But those same patterns might create blind spots. "May I ask a question?" Jin addressed the elders. They exchanged glances before one nodded permission. "Has anyone ever considered that the puzzle might not be meant to be solved in its current form?" Silence greeted his question. The eldest Moranian leaned forward. "Explain your meaning." "On Earth, we have a saying. Sometimes you must think outside the box. What if the puzzle requires transformation before it can be solved?" The elders murmured among themselves. Commander Rai stepped forward with evident disapproval. "The puzzle has remained unchanged since the first queen created it. Altering it would dishonor tradition." Jin turned back to the crystal structure. "I don't mean physically changing it. I mean changing our perspective." He closed his eyes, remembering the pattern of symbols on the chamber walls. When he opened them again, he circled the puzzle, viewing it from every angle. In human mathematics, some problems are unsolvable in 3 dimensions, but become simple in 4 or more dimensions, he explained. What if this puzzle represents a similar concept? Jin placed his hands on opposite sides of the crystal. Instead of trying to solve each facet independently, he visualized the entire structure as a single system. The crystal began to pulse with light, responding to his approach. One by one, the sections aligned, not into a perfect solution, but into a new configuration that revealed a hidden pattern. The crystal projected an image into the air above it, a star map showing Mora and Earth connected by a luminous path. The elders rose to their feet in unison, their expressions unreadable to Jin's human eyes. "Partial success," the eldest finally declared, "different from any previous attempt." Commander Rai looked troubled. The star path was not part of the traditional solution. Perhaps because no traditional thinker could reveal it, Queen Lyra said, entering the chamber. "The human approach has shown us something new." Jin stepped away from the crystal, his mind exhausted from the effort. "I don't claim to have solved it completely. I simply approached it differently." "And therein lies wisdom," Lyra replied. "Your species' greatest strength may be your willingness to abandon established patterns when they no longer serve." That evening, Jin was invited to join the queen in her private gardens. Unlike the formal palace spaces, this area felt natural and unplanned. Living crystals provided gentle illumination as night fell. "You've surprised many with your performance in the trials," Lyra said as they walked among flowering plants that closed at their approach. "Even the purest faction has been forced to acknowledge your capabilities." "I'm still an outsider," Jin replied. "And Commander Rai seems determined to see me fail." "Rai serves tradition, not me personally. His opposition is not from hatred, but from fear of change." Lyra stopped beside a pool of liquid that reflected the 3 moons overhead. "Come, there is something I must show you." They entered a section of the garden Jin hadn't seen before. Here, small crystal monuments lined a winding path. Each crystal contained a holographic image of a young Moranian. "My siblings," Lyra explained, her voice softening. 12 brothers and sisters born in my clutch. I am the only survivor." Jin moved slowly past each memorial, noting the ages at death. None had lived past their 10th year. This one was Dory, my favorite brother, Lyra said, stopping at a crystal showing a male child with unusually bright eyes. He was brilliant even as a child. Our scientists believed he might have become our greatest physicist. He died in my arms during his 7th year, when his cellular structure began to degrade. Jin felt the weight of her loss. I'm truly sorry. Each royal generation grows smaller and weaker, Lyra continued. My mother had 26 siblings at birth. Only 3 survived to adulthood. I had 12 siblings. The next generation may have none. They reached the end of the path where a small terrarium contained a single blue flower. This is the last midnight bloom on Mora, Lyra explained. Once, they covered our hills by the thousands. Our environmental mistakes cost us much of our natural heritage. We learned to treasure diversity too late. Jin understood the parallel she was drawing. Your people lost biological diversity in the same way. Yes, the Great Migration that established our empire also created a genetic bottleneck. The royal line suffered most severely because tradition demanded we remain pure. Her expression turned sardonic at the word. Purity has become our downfall. As they returned through the garden, Jin felt a subtle vibration. Then alarms began to sound throughout the palace. Your Majesty. A guard ran toward them. The purest faction has moved against the council. They've seized the central chambers. Lyra's expression hardened instantly. Secure the northern wing. Alert all loyal guards. Jin followed as the queen moved with surprising speed toward the palace. What's happening? Civil conflict, she explained tersely. Some believe your presence has gone too far. They would rather face extinction than change. They reached a security center where displays showed armed Moranians moving through palace corridors. Commander Rai leads them, an officer reported. Rai? Lyra seemed genuinely shocked. He opposes my decisions, but has always honored his oath. He claims to serve the true tradition by preventing dilution of our bloodline, the officer explained. A message appeared on the main screen. Commander Rai, his armor now bearing traditional war markings. My queen, I act with the authority of the ancestral code, Rai stated formally. The human must be removed and the genetic program abandoned. Our species will face its destiny with dignity rather than compromise our essence. Lyra's response was immediate and authoritative. You mistake pride for dignity, Commander. Stand down. We cannot, Your Majesty. The council chambers are secured. The human will be returned to his world unharmed if you agree to abandon this path. Jin stepped forward. Queen Lyra, perhaps I should speak with him. This conflict is because of my presence. No, Lyra said firmly. This conflict has been brewing for generations between those who would adapt and those who cling to tradition at any cost. Suddenly, security sensors blared warnings. The palace defense systems detected explosive devices being placed near the royal quarters. They intend to destroy your genetic samples, the security officer realized. Lyra turned to Jin, her expression grave. Captain Jin, I release you from the trials. Return to your ship and depart. This is now an internal matter. Jin shook his head. With respect, Your Majesty, I came to help your people. I won't abandon that mission because it's become difficult. Before she could respond, the lights failed. Emergency systems activated, bathing everything in blue illumination. Through the confusion, Jin noticed something the Moranians had missed, a pattern in the rebel movements visible on the security displays. They're using a pincer formation, he said, pointing to the screen. Classic Earth military tactic. They're not just targeting the genetic lab. They're coming for you. The palace trembled as explosions rocked its eastern wing. Jin and Queen Lyra moved through secret passages, their path lit only by the emergency lights that cast everything in cool blue shadows. The royal bunker is ahead, Lyra said, her voice steady despite the chaos. It was designed to withstand any attack. Jin followed closely, his diplomatic training now secondary to the military experience he'd gained years before joining the diplomatic corps. Commander Rai knows these passages too. Yes, but not the override codes I've implemented. Lyra pressed her palm against a section of wall that looked identical to all others. It dissolved, revealing a command center filled with loyal guards and council members. Your Majesty, the officers bowed quickly. The rebels have taken the main laboratories and destroyed the genetic samples. Lyra's face showed no emotion, but Jin noticed her crown, the living metal that served as both symbol and communication device, pulse with rapid patterns. Our work is backed up, she stated calmly. Captain Jin, this is Chief Scientist Miso. An elderly Moranian approached and bowed to Jin. Your genetic profile remains secure in our backup systems. The rebels have destroyed only physical samples. Screens around the room showed the rebellion spreading throughout the palace. Commander Rai appeared on the largest display, his message broadcasting to all Moranians. The ancient ways must be preserved, he declared. Our species may face extinction, but we will do so with our heritage intact. Lyra stepped forward and activated the communication system. Commander, you forget the most ancient way of all. Adaptation. Our ancestors survived by embracing change, not rejecting it. Jin watched as the two leaders engaged in verbal combat. This was about far more than his presence. It was the culmination of a philosophical divide that had grown for generations. Your Majesty, Jin said quietly when Lyra stepped away from the communications panel. May I offer a suggestion? Lyra nodded, her attention focused but her expression showing the strain of leadership in crisis. On Earth, when ideological conflicts reach this point, sometimes a third option is needed, something neither side has considered. Jin signed the document using both Earth and Moranian protocols. The treaty established a scientific exchange program, with human genetic diversity becoming available to save the Moranians, while their advanced technology would help Earth solve its environmental challenges. The stars have always guided us, Lyra concluded. Now we know they guide us toward each other. As Jin boarded the vessel that would take him home, he carried memories and knowledge no human had possessed before. The Moranian crisis had revealed tantalizing clues about possible ancient connections between their species, questions that would drive scientific research for generations. Queen Lyra met him at the boarding platform for a final conversation. The third trial was never completed, she noted. The spiritual challenge. Jin nodded. I wondered about that. The rebellion was your spiritual trial, Lyra explained. Faced with conflict, you chose understanding over victory, compromise over domination. These are the qualities the trial was designed to test. She presented him with a small crystal container. Inside floated what appeared to be a seed. The last midnight bloom, she said. Our botanists have determined it might grow in Earth soil, a symbol of how life adapts when given new opportunities. Jin accepted the gift with proper Moranian gestures of respect. I will ensure it finds a good home, as you have done for our future, Lyra replied. The journey back to Earth gave Jin time to prepare his report for the United Council. How does one explain becoming both less and more than was expected? He had gone to Mora as a potential royal consort, but was returning as something more valuable, a bridge between worlds. When Earth finally appeared through the viewport, blue and welcoming, Jin felt changed in ways he couldn't fully articulate. The Moranians had sought human adaptation to save their species, but in the process, humanity had gained a future among the stars. Behind him, secured in the ship's biological containment, the midnight bloom seed had already begun to germinate, adapting to its journey just as both species would adapt to their shared future.